Hi there, welcome to Limbus IDs for Dummies. I'm Cade. Today we're going to be breaking down the manager of LaManchaland, Don Kyote. This is not a beginner-friendly ID at first glance, solely because she has multiple resources, form changes, conditional scaling, and team-dependent mechanics. But once you separate the keywords from the actual gameplay function, her design is very deliberate and surprisingly well structured. In this video, I'm going to simplify her kit, what her skills actually do, how Bloodfeast works, how her Bloodfiend transformation functions, what teams she belongs to, and whether or not she is worth building. By the end, you should understand not just what her skills say, but what you're actually supposed to do with them. Manager Don is a scaling DPS with resource conversion mechanics. Her core identity revolves around three separate things: bleed interaction, Bloodfeast resource management, and Bloodfiend form amplification. She's not a pure bleed unit, and she's not really your traditional hypercarry either. Instead, she functions as a conditional snowball DPS. If the field is properly set up, she accelerates rapidly. And if it isn't, her damage output is noticeably lower. In terms of ease of use, I'd classify her as intermediate to advanced, not because her turn-to-turn gameplay is mechanically complex, but because understanding when she spikes requires understanding her resource flow. At a fundamental level, she converts bleed on the field into Bloodfeast. Bloodfeast then enhances her skills. Once certain conditions are met, she enters Bloodfiend form, which amplifies her damage significantly. So, instead of thinking she has 14 conditional lines of text, think she builds resource, she spends said resource, she transforms, and then she nukes. But before we talk about her skills, we need to understand Bloodfeast. Bloodfeast is a unique resource used by Bloodfiend identities. It is not a status effect, it does not sit on enemies, it is a stored resource tied to Bloodfiend units. You can think of it as a secondary meter that builds through bleed interaction. In simple terms, Bloodfeast is generated when bleed is triggered. When an enemy with bleed takes damage from that bleed, Bloodfiend IDs convert a portion of that interaction into Bloodfeast. So, more bleed on enemies, more bleed damage occurring, more Bloodfeast generated. This means Bloodfeast is indirectly dependent on how much bleed your team applies, how often bleed actually procs, and how long enemies survive with stacks on them. Bloodfeast is not just passive scaling, it's a spendable resource. Bloodfiend IDs consume Bloodfeast to increase their skill power, increase coin values, trigger enhanced states, or enable transformation effects. In Dawn's case specifically, Bloodfeast is the fuel that enables her Bloodfiend amplification window. Without Bloodfeast, she functions as a baseline bleed interacting DPS. With Bloodfeast available, however, her damage ceiling increases dramatically. The most important thing to understand is this: Bloodfeast is team generated but individually consumed. This means if multiple Bloodfiend identities are on the field, they compete for the same generated resource. This has direct implications for your team building, which we'll discuss later. For now, the takeaway is simple. Bleed feeds Bloodfeast, Bloodfeast feeds Dawn. If you want the one-sentence explanation, bleed damage turns into vampire fuel, and Dawn runs in that fuel like a fucking sports car. Now, let's talk about her transformation. Manager of LaManchaland, Don Kyote, has access to a Bloodfiend state. This state is not random, it's not turn-based, it's conditionally triggered through Bloodfeast interaction. When sufficient conditions are met, typically involving Bloodfeast thresholds, she enters an enhanced state commonly referred to as her Bloodfiend form. In her Bloodfiend form, her skill values increase, her damage ceiling rises, her scaling becomes significantly more explosive, and certain effects become amplified or gain additional conditions. This is her nuking window. Outside of it, like I said before, she's a scaling bleed interacting DPS. Inside of it, she becomes a sort of high outburst threat. Kind of like a nuclear bomb, one could say. The key thing to understand is that her entire kit is structured around reaching and capitalizing on this state. You're not playing her for steady flat damage, you're playing her to build resource, trigger amplification, and maximize burst damage during that state. Now that we understand Bloodfeast and her transformation, let's look at her skills and see how they actually support that game plan. Now let's look at her first skill, Enough is Enough. It is a 2-coin sloth skill. On paper, it looks simple, but there are a few important interactions happening underneath. It has moderate base power, standard coin scaling, and HP restoration. This is important because it is designed to stabilize her resource flow. This skill applies bleed, and that alone might not sound impressive, but remember, bleed application is not just damage over time for Dawn. Bleed on the field means potential Blood Feast generation, so when skill 1 applies bleed, what it's really doing is setting up future Blood Feast triggers. Depending on your current Blood Feast levels, Enough is Enough is enhanced to Variant Hard Blood Arts 6, Whip, which is a 3-coin sloth skill featuring a brand new mechanic called Unbreakable Coins. Unbreakable Coins, as the name suggests, are coins that cannot be broken in clashes. An Unbreakable Coins effect will always activate regardless of who wins the clash. Her second skill, Let All Blossom Free, is a 2-coin Wrath skill with moderate clash power. Much like her first skill, this skill also heals and inflicts bleed. However, unlike the first skill, this skill does more damage depending on the amount of bleed stacks the enemy you are facing have. This is where her scaling damage comes into play. Depending on the current amount of Blood Feast stacks in your possession, this skill is enhanced to Variant Sancho Hard Blood Arts 8, Split Apart, which allows this skill to gain more clash power depending on the amount of bleed on the opponent. It also converts some of its coins into Unbreakable Coins. Skill 3, I Shall Impale, is a 3-coin Gluttony skill. This skill is Dawn's highest damaging skill. On top of it being the most damaging, it has the highest clash power. It does more damage based on the amount of Blood Feast consumed, as well as the amount of bleed stacks on the enemy. This skill, like the others, also has an enhanced version, Ascendant Sancho Hard Blood Arts, La Sangra. This increases the damage dealt by the skill, as well as converts it into a skill with 4 Unbreakable Coins. Pretty ridiculous. Manager Dawn's defense skill, Laughter Will Subside, is a 2-coin Gluttony clashable counter that consumes Blood Feast, inflicts bleed, and causes her to gain something called Hard Blood, which is something I've refrained from mentioning until now. Hard Blood is a resource that builds automatically under certain conditions and helps directly amplify Dawn's skills and survivability. Hard Blood is unique to Dawn. Unlike Blood Feast, it is not shared across the team. It accumulates over time when specific triggers occur, usually tied to bleed interaction and skill usage. It functions as a hidden scaling meter, boosting her damage and sometimes enhancing coin effects. Hard Blood increases when she triggers or consumes bleed from her skills or passive interactions, when she spends Blood Feast in her skills, or when certain skill conditions are met. For example, after Skill 2 or Skill 3's execution. Think of it like a secondary progression bar. You're not always aware it's building, but it ensures her output ramps up organically as the fight continues. It makes her damage scale higher the more skills she's been able to use, so therefore the longer the fight goes on, the stronger she will become. Now, onto her passives. In short, her passives help buff other Bloodfiend allies depending on the amount of hard blood stacks she has. It also increases her damage depending on the amount of HP she's missing. Her support passive allows allies to gain this same effect. The manager of LaManchaland, Don Kyote, is best ran in bleed teams alongside other Bloodfiend allies. In Mirror Dungeon, you want ego gifts that amplify the amount of bleed stacks the enemies receive. She is a hard-hitting, sustainable unit with high clash power and high attack weight. The best ego I recommend using on her is Yearning Merkala, which is a WoW ranked ego you can get from the Shard Shop as it is a Battle Pass ego from Season 5. The best way to play Manager Dawn is to use her first and second skills to apply bleed and build up your Blood Feast and Hard Blood stacks. Save your third skill for difficult clashes or when you need to do heavy boss damage. It is best to save it until you have the enhanced skill 3 as it will provide the most damage. And that's Manager of LaManchaland, Don Kyote Simplified. If this breakdown helped you understand her mechanics, resource flow, or team building, consider leaving a like. It helps the channel more than you might think. If there's another ID you'd like to see covered in this For Dummies format, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.